Good morning, beautiful people of the center. Some of you were here yesterday evening when we had the ordination of Reverend Lisa and Reverend Leslie, and Erica and Lisa were both here to perform, and it was so wonderful. And just before that, the evening before, I think it was, they launched their new CD, and that's one of the songs from their new CD, and they brought them along, leaning into the good. You know, when we heard they were going to be in town, we just nabbed them for Sunday morning, and wasn't much resistance. They agreed to come up, and it's beautifully done. You can go see them after the service and enjoy a chat and get some of their music to take home. Thank you. Well, as you heard, our topic this morning is the power of you and self-discovery, based on the book by the author Chris Michaels, and the author, is coming to speak next week to tell us about his journey of discovering himself. So I thought I would tell you his life story in preparation for his visit, because actually his life story could be any one of our life stories. Isn't that the way it goes? We're all living each other's lives anyway. Yeah. I was listening to a speaker who was talking about, the most ancient story written down, the story of Gilgamesh, and how upon reading it she realized that there's actually nothing new in it. It's still the story of who done what to whom and who wants what, and the dissatisfaction with getting, Isn't that something? So we get to relive the story until we discover what it is that we are supposed to discover. Well, this is the story of our guest speaker, Dr. Chris Michaels. Somehow at a very, very young age, he learned this. You are never going to be enough. And who knows where the message comes from? Maybe it comes from some of the same places that your similar message comes from, right? Could come from family members. It could come from friends at school, or maybe it just comes from the ongoing negative cultural messages that are heaped upon us in an ongoing negative way. So that over time, it's just little by little bit, it's established into a form of normal. So this is how he experienced it. He said by the second grade, he heard from teachers that based on his art skill lesson, that he was never going to be an artist. He learned that was going to work. And then by the fifth grade, he said it only took about 2 PE classes for him to know absolutely he was never going to be accomplished in anything athletic. And then by the sixth grade, he started to be so continuously bullied by the other tougher kids that he started to contract. So that by the seventh grade, he was using drugs in school to cope. And by 14 years of age, he was kicked out of school for smoking and drinking, trying to cope. By 12th grade, this part-time distraction of hiding from this confusing message inside him, this coping mechanism, turned into a full-time habit and eventually into a full-time destructive way of life. So that he carried it into adulthood. And he says by the time he got to adulthood, it really didn't matter that there weren't any people around him actually saying the words, "You aren't good enough," because by that point it had been so trained into him that in his own words, he said, I was repeating it over and over and over again in my very own head, like a tape on repeat. It reminds me of something the author Sally Kempton said. She said, it's very hard to fight an enemy that has outposts in your own head, right? Because then if the watchtower is in your own head, there's not even an enemy anymore. It's part of the team. It brings up the question, what did you pick up along the way of your growing up? And what did you integrate into your story of who you are? In other words, what have you learned so far about this thing called you? What have you learned about the you of you? And what do you take to be normal about the you of you? I think we have to, you and I, everybody have to look very deeply into that question, because sometimes what we find inside of us will appear to be more real than actual facts. There's a lot of value in learning to question what you think. what we teach about it at the center. We say things aren't always as they appear to be. Sometimes things appear to be exactly how we take them to be. Well, back to the story. So now he's 20 years old, and he's drinking heavily and having moments of short-term memory loss as a result of abusing Quaaludes, not knowing where he's been or what he's done. And he summarizes this point in the story as miserable, unhappy, and dissatisfied. Maybe you've been in such a place. I mean, the circumstances of getting there might be different, but maybe you recognize that place. It's the stage in the story where we, some of us, are constantly reaching for something, anything, or for someone, anyone, to make us feel good about being ourselves. And then one day, this is the part of the story we like, and then one day he walks into a center for spiritual living, right? And you know it doesn't have to be a center for spiritual living. It's the change point in the story where you meet your change point. It could be anywhere, any spiritual center. It could be a person, it could be a book, but you walk in. He walks into a center for spiritual living and he hears a message he has never heard before. He hears a message he's not expecting to hear. And the message goes like this: you are perfect, just as you are right now. You are perfect, just as you are right now. You are perfect, just as you are right now. And he goes, just like so many of us go when we hear that. You go, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. I mean, how many of us reject that the first time we encounter it? I remember about 12 years ago getting a note in the offering. Somebody dropped a note in the offering, and this lady wrote to me, said, "How dare you have the audacity to tell people that they are good?" Yeah, I kept that note for years to remind me to keep going. It reminds me of Og Mandino's book, The Greatest Miracle in the World, in which the memorandum from God appears. This is God's memorandum to you. Let me share with you again the secret you heard at your birth and forgot. You are my greatest miracle. You are the greatest miracle in the world. Those were the first words you ever heard. Then you cried. They all cry. So Chris, in the Center for Spiritual Living, he hears the message. God loves you just as you are. You are whole. You are perfect just as you are. And he says in the book, and I didn't believe it. I wanted to believe it, but I didn't. In fact, I was pretty sure that God did not love me just the way that I was, and that there wasn't a chance that anyone else could either. And I'm going to stay around and figure out how these people get to think that way. Right? Because this is the part of the story where, maybe it's your story, maybe you know this point. This is the part of the story where the self-improvement program kicks into high gear, right? The strategy starts. So he takes every class. He reads every book. He goes to every seminar. He purchases every CD. He brings friends. He tells friends. He loses friends. He makes new friends. He gets a better job, a better place to live. He gets better habits. He gets clearer. And it all gets better, much, much better. In his words, he says, everything that needed to be fixed was getting fixed. And it had immediate payoff, right? Because the new, improved Chris is healthier and happier and a whole lot more pleasant to be around. So now when he goes into the room at the Center for Spiritual Living, he's in a different place, because when he hears, "You're perfect," and he hears, "God loves you," he goes, "Yeah. Of course, why wouldn't that which creates love its own creation? I mean, I've got it going on." And can't you tell something's going to go wrong right about here? Right? Right about here. Yeah, this is the place in the movie where the music starts to go, duh, right? You know something's going to go wrong. Well, because something's missing in the formula, or even better, something is still there. So he hits this glass ceiling. He can't go any further because he's done as much as he can do with cosmetic renovations. I remember one of the first houses I bought, the previous owners, they knew there was mold in one of the kitchen walls. They painted over it. So don't you know it comes right through. Well, I didn't know any better. I painted over it too. Yeah, but don't you know it comes right through. And you can paint until you're blue in the face. It's coming right through because something's rotten at the core. You can't paint your way out of it. Don't you know? And he says, but oddly enough, even after years of self-improvement, it was still there. This deep longing in my soul. In the quiet hours of the day when all of the distractions were taken away and I was left alone with my thoughts, I still craved something and I couldn't figure out what it was. I can just imagine him asking himself, since what we do to ourselves and we do to our friends, what more could you possibly want? Look at you. You've got everything. Cheer up. Take an affirmation. See, this is the point in the story, the one story in which the main character, could be you, could be me, could be him. This is where the character realizes that having more of everything is not necessarily going to fix you. Having everything and more of everything is not exactly everything that it is portrayed to be in the advertisements. You must know the old joke about the religious scientist who passes on and goes to the gates for the hereafter, and he gets there and the gatekeeper says, well, no, things have changed. We're modern now. You're not assigned somewhere. You get to choose where you want to go, freedom of choice. So we'll show you around, and they take him to heaven, and everybody's walking around serenely praying in white robes and a halo floating around the head. He looks at that, it's very calm, and they say, and here's the other place, and they take him in, and it's a party, the pool party, and there are margaritas, and everybody's dancing, it's fabulous. So they say, where would you like to go? And he says, well, I'd like the pool party, thank you. And so they say, very well, and they open the door, they let him in, and everybody's suffering, and it's dark, and it's hot, and it's painful. And he says, what's going on? Where's the pool party? And they say, oh no, that was just the brochure. It's the point in the story where the main character discovers the real secret. That success, acquiring, getting things, looking amazing, having status will never, ever be as amazing as discovering the love that you are and installing that into your consciousness as a permanent tape. That nothing will ever be as amazing as doing the one thing, the only thing that you know how to do, that you're qualified to do, that you're born to do, which is to love yourself, to love other people, to love the planet, to love animals, to love life, and to love as much as you possibly can in a healthy, conscious, non-controlling, mindful, compassionate, and delightful, joy-spreading, tree-hugging way. Right? Right? That's it. And what Chris discovered is if you search too much for it out there in the form of something out there, you will miss the big secret and the big surprise that it's inside of you. That the awesomeness of the universe is what you are made of. Try putting lipstick on that. I'm thinking of one of Kabir's poems. It goes like this. I burst into laughter whenever I hear that the fish is thirsty in water. Huh? It goes on, without the knowledge of the self, people just wander here and there, like the musk deer, unaware of the scent in his navel, goes on running around in the forest. He's referring to the musk deer of the Himalayas. It's got a very peculiar habit. Maybe you know this. It reminds us of how the thing that is driving us crazy is closer than we think, because the musk deer's own scent is so alluring that when the stag smells it, he gets crazy to find the source of it, not realizing all the while that it's coming from a gland in his own belly. So as he walks around, he's scenting the trail and he's going nuts in the forest looking for this object of his desire, and all of the while it is closer than his very breath. All the while. This is the part of our story in which we finally realize the message. It's not out there. Or in his words, and this is his own conversation with himself, what more do you want? I asked myself. You have a better life, more friends and more money. What else could you possibly want? And no answer came. Nothing. Just this deep sense that something was missing. And then the thoughts returned, old ones I hadn't entertained in a long time, and the message was still loud and clear. You are not good enough. See, sadly, at this point in the story, a couple of things at least could happen. And one of them, it's often the case that the main character, the seeker in the story, decides that this isn't working and it's the fault of the teaching, whatever the current teaching is. What is being learned here is that's the problem. Something outside is the problem. And then what happens is the seeker then goes off to search for something else, another book, another teacher, another place, another center with more convenient parking. Anywhere else, another high in another place and another seminar, something else, someone else, something else, anything, anyone, another high. You know, it's just why, really, if you know where to look, any religion will do. There isn't a right way, you know that. But hopefully, in some stories, what happens at this point is instead of running around night and day on the hillside like a crazed musk deer, the seeker stops and turns to look into the emptiness and stops trying to fix it. It's a pivotal moment. It's not weakness. It's the most profound moment of power. So instead of trying to shut the voice up this time, I leaned into my longing and I felt the sadness and emptiness in my soul that came from years of buying into the story that I'm not good enough. Something I'd been trying to avoid doing for a long time. And that's where he realized, that's when we realize, that absolutely everything on the outside had indeed changed, but the inside had not. There was still mold in the walls, and no paint could keep it from seeping through. My motivation had not changed. The core belief was still lodged inside. You are not good enough. I was just reacting to it in a different way. Instead of anesthetizing it with drugs and alcohol, I was schooling it, trying to improve it or amend it. And all that did is put a shiny but thin veneer on top of it. And so he learns, whoever he or she is in the story, in this moment in the story, it's this, that no matter how a person tries to satisfy their soul longing by arranging things in the outer world to look good, and don't get me wrong, getting your stuff together is very important. Handling your stuff is part of the equation. You got to take care of the structures in your life. I'm not saying just sit down and say an affirmation, right? You know that. You've been around a long time. You know that, right? But there's this point where you realize, whoever you is, that all the rearranging on the outside will not stop that longing. It will never let us rest until we take the steps to come face to face with our own soul and discover who we really are, without all of the trappings of what we own, what we've accomplished, where we've been, who we know, how successful we are, so that whatever state we are in right now, to compassionately love that, to take that in and to love that. In one of the classes I teach, I talk to people about doing some mirror work to address this. I say to them, in the first thing in the morning, before you even have time to clean it all up, go stand in front of the mirror, preferably fully naked, right? And stand there and look and love that and to take that in. And I remember one lady coming to me and she was just crying so hard. It was so far out of her realm of possibility to do that because of the messages running in her so deep. And she said that she had to first start in the absolute darkness, just knowing that there was a mirror there with her image, before she could have the courage to love what appeared before her, let alone look at it. Imagine that. Inevitably, your spiritual journey will lead you back to yourself. You can look in 1,000 other places for your good and spend 1,000 years doing it, but eventually you'll have to go within and face who you are. And he gives practical suggestions for how to do that. It's not only his story, he suggests how we might do the same. For example, this exercise in self-discovery. He says, spend some time reflecting on the stories of your life, because isn't that where we sometimes get stuck? Right in the stories. He says, which one is the most dramatic? Which one do you hear yourselves tell others repeatedly? Which one taught you the most powerful lesson? Which one hurt you the most? What was the hardest lesson you've ever learned? Who was the teacher of that lesson? And here comes the practical part. He says, consider making a video recording of yourself telling the story or answering these questions. And when you are finished, watch the recording and notice, how do I feel when I watch myself tell the story? And then ask yourself, what will be different the next time I tell it? Whew. This is a sort of exercise. I'll read about it first before I try it, because I already feel nervous thinking I may have to face my stories and tell them in a different way if I want to move beyond them. He says, we waste so much of our time here on earth searching out there for something to satisfy us. We spin our wheels trying to find happiness and satisfaction in life by manipulating outside events and worshiping external deities. And yet, ironically, in the last place on earth we ever think to look, the truth has been placed within us. The God we go in search of resides within us. Now, Dr. Chris Michaels is coming next week to tell in his own words the story of his self-discovery and to share with us ways that we might go on the journey of discovering our own self for ourselves. So I highly recommend that you make a date with yourself to be here next week to hear it. And now let us pray. I invite you to breathe in and to sigh as we turn within and each in our own way acknowledge that source from which we come, whether we call it God or the thing itself or the mind of creation or spirit or love or life. It's the same thing. It's beyond the reach of any words we can come up with, and yet we point to it with our thought so that we may remember in this infinity, in this mind we live and move and have our being. We move and live and breathe in the mind of God. And so as this prayer moves through us, it opens the acceptance of a new reality that is based on the clear, conscious acceptance of the perfection that we have inherited, of the freedom we have to see ourselves as we are, of the goodness that we are. We see that now. And so waking up to this then, feeling the relaxation that comes with dropping into peace, we acknowledge that all is well. And so it is.